Story 1. So I am the oldest kid of 3, and my parents typically push the oldest harder than the rest, which is normal until you force the kid into doing it the way the parents want, like enforcing the driver's license rules of the road only on the older kid. In the US, at least in Maryland, you can't have anyone except family in the car with you until you pass the probation period. My dad's teaching method is basically, you do it my way or you are on your own. I don't care what it is as long as it's logical. Meaning if he thinks it's logical, then he accepts it. If not, then he insults me for making a dumb curse word decision. Now, most people would instinctively defend themselves or at least try to explain why they make that decision. I try that and get pounded by the, there's no logic behind that and you are very unreasonable. Come talk to me when you have a reason behind that. This is getting to the point where I don't tell my parents, mom included, because my dad always gets involved, of anything that involves a serious decision. I am 23 and my dad has been controlling everything I do. I got my first job at 16 because my dad wanted me to get a job earlier than he did. He got his at 18, even though I had no common sense of what was the right thing to do at the time. P.S. I got fired from that job for doing something that my dad later insulted me for getting fired. He found out I got fired because he goes to the place where I worked quite frequently. A week after I got fired, my dad finally got around to explaining what I should have done to avoid being fired, along with jabs of how dumb I am, because he's never been fired or lost a job before. For everyone who doesn't work for the federal government or is international, the federal government offers great benefits and basically encourages employees to work there by offering pension for time worked. There are retirement benefits, healthcare benefits. I get the jokes about how expensive us healthcare is. I have gone to the hospital for breaking my wrist, employee protection, and all of that. The job that is currently pushing my buttons is working for the US federal government. For background, I still live with my parents because I want to save up until I can find a house to move into. It's Transportation Security Administration, or the blue shirts at the airport. It's the absolute lowest you can go in the federal security field. The whole reason I picked the job is I got insulted for choosing FBI and US Capitol Police as one of my application attempts. The reason why my dad has the choice to insult me is he thinks that I will not pass the psychological evaluation that all police have to go through. Of course, my dad insults my thought of even attempting to pass the basic test of how educated you are. It's a requirement for federal agencies to check to make sure you actually paid attention in school. The Transportation Security Administration only requires a high school degree and is low stress compared to the top agencies, according to my dad. I told him that a majority of your day is not what you see on the news. While the low stress is pretty accurate to what I have seen from taking flights, the next thing is what really grinds me. You are carrying a gun. Are you sure you aren't going to turn it on someone? You know how angry you get when I talk to you. Yes, it's because you don't filter anything and make Gordon Ramsay seem nice. One of the things I need to do before I can even start working for the job is to fill out many forms for retirement, and all of those things for pension to make sure I can still live after I retire. Many banks have very low interest rates, so my dad wants me to put as much of my paycheck into retirement accounts, so I can earn at a faster rate. Why would you need to have some income from the Transportation Security Administration? You have some money from your retail job. Do you really think you can blow all of your retail money by the next federal fiscal year? I am not going into what a fiscal year is because it gets really technical. It's not like a regular calendar year is all I'm going to explain. The US government is weird. If you end up needing money, come ask me for money and I will help you out. No. Not going to do that. Dad, you are just going to criticize how I managed to blow $6,000 in a year. Story 2. I have 2 entitled aunts, let's call them Mary and Terry, and grandmother on my mom's side that have been a thorn in my family's side for decades now. This started back around 1998. I was roughly around 10 years old when I finally realized their true colors. Around that time my parents had a falling out that ended in divorce. Mutual overall. I lived with my mom. Brother lived with my dad till later. My mom got the house we had lived in after the split. For reference, it was a small two-bedroom bath house. Some backstory on the kind of people my aunts are. My mom was a recovering alcoholic at the time, about 3 years sober, and we were at my grandmother's house for Christmas. Some facts about my mom. She's highly allergic to birds and could easily be tempted into drinking at the time. Both facts were well known by her sisters. We started opening presents, and my mother's first present was from Mary, a lovely pair of gloves, with real feathers on the wrist area on them. Great choice there. The following present was from Terry to my mom. A bottle of wine. How thoughtful for a recovering alcoholic. After we finished opening the presents, my mom confronted them about both items, which they naturally played the "oh my, we didn't know that" card, and my grandmother said it's not a big deal, and that my mom should be thankful for what she got. They continued to do small jabs like this, playing the victim card over the years. A couple years after the divorce, 2000, my mom couldn't manage the house payments with the job she had anymore and decided we needed to move a few cities over. Unfortunately, she also decided to ask my grandfather for help selling her house because they were both in the retail field, and she figured they'd help her out with the fees / paperwork / etc., which they did help with and more. More on that later. We moved into the new house about 8 years later after a decent amount of family drama. My parents remarried, and we were living in a townhouse not too far from where we had originally moved after selling the first house. Mary's time to shine. My dad had never been fond of either of my mom's sisters and usually didn't give them the time of day in most cases. One day, out of the blue, Mary decided she was going to invite herself over to our house without even a phone call, which was odd because she lived over an hour away from us at the time. She arrived and graced us with her presence. Drop everything you were doing and pay attention to me mentality. I was, still am, an avid gamer at the time, and I was in the middle of an event on the game I was playing, so I decided to continue playing even after finding out she had arrived. Obviously, this was not to Mary's liking, and proceeded to make it known to both my parents, saying that, "How can he keep playing that game when I'm here?" Which my dad apparently replied with, "Well, you weren't invited nor let us know you'd be coming over to begin with, and he's doing something already." She did not like that rage mode activated. "Well, he's got no life if he's always sitting on that stupid computer playing games. You guys are setting him up for failure." Mind you, I was a straight A student for year letterman in 3 different sports at the time. I heard the arguing, but I figured it was just the normal crap she would cause every once in a while, so I kept playing my game. Until I heard my parents yelling something along the lines of, "Don't ever freaking come back here," while slamming the door on Mary's face. Apparently she didn't like that and went straight to my grandmother's to complain and play the victim card, which naturally always worked. A few uneventful phone calls followed that day, but nothing came from it, other than she wasn't allowed over anymore, thank God. Adding this because I found it hilarious back then. When AOL was the thing to use for the internet back then, it would run over the phone line, and initially whenever someone called the house, it would kick me off the internet. After a while, AOL changed it to have caller ID and a confirm or deny option under it. Whenever I saw Mary calling, which was very often, I would deny her call. My parents didn't have cell phones during this time, so she had no way to go around this lovely little feature until she confronted my parents about it. I played the "oh, I thought that pop-up was just an ad" card. Parents thanked me for the laugh later because she had been so pissed. Fast forward about another 8 years, and I'm talking to my mom when she brings up that she finally confirmed that my grandfather had actually screwed us out of roughly 50 grand when they helped sell our first house. Grandmother accidentally let it slip that they had actually sold it for about 65K, instead of the 15K they initially told my mom it went for. She was saying how it was going to be hard for them now because they had just sold their last rental home that they were using as an income source over the years, and the first rental they sold had lasted this long, which was actually our first house. I had joined the military soon after learning this and moved across country, so I don't have the full details on what happened following that, but to summarize from what I learned from my parents. Mary lost her job due to her firm being sued into bankruptcy due to fraud. Surprised there, she moved into my grandmother's house soon after and spent the following year job searching. Not much luck due to her previous firm's situation. Terry lost her job due to layoffs and the bank foreclosed her house. She chose to just up and leave it without paying anything, so she couldn't go back to a normal solid job because they'd apparently go after her money if she did. Surprised face here, she spent the following years jumping from place to place until she spoke with my dad. More on that in a minute. Grandmother had Mary move in with her to help maintain her mortgage after my grandfather passed about a year after I joined the military. They ended up renting out the third bedroom to a college student since they both weren't able to afford the rent and other expenses. Mary would constantly call my mom demanding that my dad and her should help with paying my grandmother's rent and for groceries. My parents simply said that she got enough from them when they sold their house and that they won't see a cent more from them. A little over a year ago, Terry had finally come to them asking for about $20,000 to buy a house out of state. A small mobile home, similar to our first house, but a major fixer-upper. My dad wasn't fond of her, but he was more lenient when it came to her over Mary, so he said he'd think about it. When I heard about it, I highly protested the idea, explaining that she's the type that'll take the money and then constantly bring up excuses on why she'd be late to pay them back. A prediction that became fact not even 2 months later. Apparently my dad had also figured this into his plan and explained it to me a few months later. After my grandmother and Mary decided to finally move out and live with Terry. My dad had apparently loaned the money to my aunt, but he also signed ownership of the house she had bought with the money he loaned her. Long story short, if she doesn't pay, all three of them are on the streets. So my dad loopholed them into basically having them by the neck years later. Story 3. 3 weeks after the initial fix, our shop had fluctuating foot traffic. Some days we had no customers, some days we had too many. It was the start of the new month. Everyone had their salaries paid in. This means our shop was very busy. We barely had enough reps to deal with customers. We only had 3 people working on any given day. I was busy talking to a customer at the tech desk with a laptop that had a lot of issues. From mails not working, to USB ports not working, to even blue screens of death. In walks the entitled mother. No entitled kid and no PC. I thought she may have just been shopping around for new games or a keyboard or something for her little devil. The entitled mother walks up to the tech desk, to which I just quickly greeted with a "Hi, I'll be with you in a minute." She stood there, arms crossed, tapping her foot as if I was inconveniencing her by talking to a customer. About 5 minutes after I booked in the laptop, printed the necessary work orders, the entitled mother looked at me with this "finally" look. The entitled mother then proceeded to ask me, I've been waiting for forever. Are you going to come pick up this computer from my car or not?" I just looked on with a confused face. She then told me she phoned the shop. My work colleague answered, and she said that she was on her way to drop off her kid's computer again. She had apparently been parked waiting outside our shop in the disabled parking spot for 15 minutes. To anyone that doesn't know, we have a disabled parking right by our front door. We're so busy that my colleague afterwards had to apologize because we didn't have the time to look outside for a car to pick up a computer, and he got too busy to inform me she was on her way. Customers did this often, but I do have a few more stories about stuff like this. So onto the computer, I went outside to fetch the machine. The entitled mother, annoyed again, asked why the game doesn't work. After a few minutes, and an entitled mother trying to explain what her son told her, I said I can figure it out and have a look at it. She then knew to ask what the labor cost would be due to the previous event. Knowing how stingy she is, I told her no more than $20. She seemed fine with this. If it was the game's fault again this time. This time, please lady, the computer is working fine. I have the same issues with the game at home. After printing out papers, she left. This is where the fun begins. We couldn't access the account for some reason. I just remember having difficulty opening Steam. At this point, I just thought he forgot his details and we did the whole Steam password reset theme. After an hour of no results, I wrote an email to Steam support asking for help with the account. The next day, Steam wrote back with something along the lines of, "This Steam account has violated the terms of service and is therefore banned." It was a lengthy email detailing why the account got banned and that it cannot be retrieved. I was shocked at this email. The entitled kid tried to add cracked Steam games to the Steam library. There were no actual bought games in his library, and I saw the icons on the desktop for a few games that cost well over $20, and bought aim hacking software for Ghost Recon Online. Knowing now why the game wasn't working, I called the entitled mother to ask her and her kid to come to the shop, so I can explain to her why the game isn't working. This didn't seem like something I could say over the phone. I don't know exactly why his Steam account itself was banned. Usually a Valve anti-cheat ban only affects the game you cheated in. But I think he may have even tried to crack Steam to get games for free. I don't have a lot of experience with Steam bans, so forgive me for being a bit hazy on the details. This was around 5 years ago after all. A while later, they both entered the store. As this was a Sunday, it was a lot quieter. I had printed out the response I got from Steam. I told her that the entitled kid had been using illegal software, that he also bought with her credit card without permission, and that Steam has banned his account. I handed her the printed out mail so she could confirm that I wasn't lying or making any excuses. The look on the entitled kid's face was priceless. At this point, he knew he royally messed up. He screwed da pooch. His face went white. The entitled mother turned over to him to ask what this was all about, and he just nodded and said sorry. She was livid, asking how he could just use her card without her permission. How could he buy illegal software? How he could lie to her face about all of it. At this point, the kid was bawling his eyes out. This is where I started getting some respect for the entitled mother. She didn't even complain about the labor price. She in turn asked us to keep the PC in the shop for the whole week, so her kid could learn a lesson and clear it of all the illegal software. She was even fine with paying for the extra labor hours. At the end, we did a full new Windows install as the cracks and hacks had tons of viruses included, so we spent a lot more time working on the computer. Unfortunately, in the next story, the entitled mother went back to being her entitled Karen Y self again, refusing to pay $35 for 2 days of full labor for 2 tablets, her home computer, and her entitled kid's gaming rig. Story 4. So, this happened just last night, and I'm still stunned that someone would behave this way. I'm a 30-year-old male paramedic, and I've been working in emergency medical services for 8 years. I genuinely love my job. Last night, we were dispatched to assist a 75-year-old woman who had fallen at home. She mentioned that she tripped over her carpet and hit her head when she fell. When we arrived at the scene, we saw that her home was part of a duplex, with her door on the right and her neighbor's door on the left. Inside, we found her lying on the floor. The woman was awake and breathing, so we began our routine evaluation. We asked the standard questions like whether she was in pain, if anything felt off, and if she remembered the fall. She explained that she had a pounding headache and recalled walking toward her bed before waking up on the floor. In my field, this is a red flag. We noticed a significant lump on the side of her head and a bruise already forming. I asked if she was on any medication that might affect her condition, and she confirmed that she took blood thinners due to a previous stroke a few years ago. This increased the likelihood of internal bleeding, so we strongly encouraged her to let us take her to the hospital for a scan. She agreed, and we began preparing her for transport. We applied a cervical collar to her neck as a precaution against any spinal injuries. She denied experiencing neck or back pain, so we lifted her onto our stair chair, a device designed to move patients safely up and down stairs. As we carefully maneuvered her out of the house, her neighbor suddenly burst out of her door, shouting. This neighbor was clearly upset, yelling about how she couldn't sleep because of the lights and noise outside. Apparently, the sound of the stair chair had woken her up. My lieutenant calmly approached her and apologized, explaining that we were responding to a medical emergency and would be leaving soon. At this point, The neighbor recognized our patient as her neighbor. Instead of showing concern, she began shouting about something entirely different. She exclaimed, "You can't take her to the hospital. I have errands to run tomorrow, and she needs to watch my kids." My lieutenant reiterated that our patient's health took priority and tried to de-escalate the situation, but the neighbor angrily slammed her door. We thought that was the end of it. Unfortunately, we were wrong. A few minutes later, we were in the back of the ambulance, checking the patient's vitals and administering intravenous fluids. I told my lieutenant he could take the fire crew back to the station since we'd soon be en route to the hospital. My partner climbed into the driver's seat while I stayed in the back with the patient. Suddenly, the ambulance doors flew open, and there she was again, the neighbor. I couldn't believe my eyes. She had taken the time to get dressed before storming outside, but her actions were even more outrageous this time. I yelled, "What on earth do you think you're doing?" She shouted back. "I told you she can't go to the hospital because she has to watch my kids tomorrow." The situation escalated quickly. She tried to pull the stretcher out of the ambulance, with the patient still strapped in. Thankfully, she couldn't figure out how to unlatch the stretcher. Meanwhile, the patient, visibly upset, said, "I can't watch your kids tomorrow. I fell, and I might be having a stroke." The neighbor screamed, "You're fine. You're not having a stroke." At that moment, my partner heard the commotion and rushed to the back. He pulled the neighbor away from the stretcher while I locked the ambulance doors to secure the patient. The neighbor was furious and appeared ready to lash out physically. Thankfully, law enforcement was already en route due to our location and standard protocol for night calls. A sheriff's deputy arrived just in time. From inside the ambulance, I saw the officer exit his cruiser, taser in hand, ready to address the situation. My partner quickly returned to the driver's seat and began driving us to the hospital. As we pulled away, I glanced through the rear window and saw the neighbor stomp toward the deputy before being subdued with a taser. It was oddly satisfying to witness. During the ride, I spoke with the patient, asking about her relationship with the neighbor. She revealed that the neighbor regularly dropped off her 3 young children without notice, leaving them in her care for hours. She hadn't even been told she was expected to babysit the next day. The neighbor's behavior was clearly inconsiderate, if not outright exploitative. Small update. I later contacted the hospital, and they confirmed that the patient did not have any internal bleeding, although she did develop a severe bruise due to the blood thinners. Bruising like that is common in such cases. She was expected to return home soon. Final update. I followed up with the responding officer and learned that the neighbor was not formally charged with any crimes. The patient is now back home and recovering well. The hospital found no signs of a brain bleed, and she was discharged the next day. She was advised to consider filing for a restraining order against the neighbor, but I don't have any further information on whether she pursued that. Some people suggested contacting authorities about potential elder or child abuse. Unfortunately, there isn't enough evidence to file a report. While the neighbor's actions were disrespectful, we didn't observe any actual abuse or neglect involving the children or the patient. Calling Child Protective Services without concrete proof could create unnecessary complications. The patient described the neighbor's actions as inconsiderate rather than abusive. While we can hope she pursues legal action for the assault, it's her decision. For now, the situation seems resolved. If anything changes, I'll provide another update. Story 5. This incident took place last spring, and honestly, the entire situation still bothers me. Around April 2024, one of my uncles visited us from another country. Unfortunately, he was deceived by a company that promised to help him start a business. He ended up spending nearly $500,000 in our local currency on this venture. At the time, I was unemployed due to health issues, so I stepped in to assist him. My uncle isn't familiar with handling emails or managing orders, so I took over those responsibilities. I also reviewed resumes to decide which employees to hire, conducted interviews, and even attended meetings with the company's marketing advisors. I essentially managed everything he needed for the business. Seeing how much I was helping him, my uncle decided to appoint me as the manager of the business. I agreed because I needed the income and had always dreamed of starting my own business. This seemed like a close step toward that goal. For an entire month, I devoted myself entirely to the venture. I shopped for materials to decorate the shop, canceled my personal plans, and committed my time fully to its setup. I assembled a competent team and ensured everyone was taken care of. My days started at 4 a.m. and didn't end until 11 p.m., and I did this without taking a single day off. I joined training sessions alongside the crew to better understand how to run the shop full-time. I also involved my best friend in creating an online page for the business. Together, we organized a photo shoot to showcase the products, and she helped regulate the page while we planned delivery services. She went above and beyond to support me. The first 5 weeks went smoothly. Although our location wasn't ideal, especially considering the prices set by the company, we managed to keep things running. We held meetings every other week with a marketing team, but it became evident they had no idea what they were doing. They advised us to focus on distributing flyers, something we were already doing. 2 of my team members even traveled to neighboring villages to advertise. Despite this, the marketing team insisted on tactics that were impractical and, in some cases, outright unethical, like advertising within other establishments. Their lack of consideration was glaring. They suggested my team work without breaks until customers showed up, even during a heat wave when temperatures soared to 40 degrees Celsius, not accounting for the heat index. I voiced my concerns, but my uncle sided with the marketing team, claiming, "They're the ones with degrees, they know what they're doing." It was obvious to me they didn't. By the 6th week, I fell ill from sheer exhaustion after weeks of non-stop work without breaks. That became a convenient excuse for the marketing team and my uncle to dismiss me. This decision backfired spectacularly. My crew, frustrated with my uncle's mismanagement, lost motivation and interest. By the 7th week, the shop closed its doors. This failure infuriated my uncle. He blamed me, claiming my supposed lack of hard work caused the business to collapse. To make matters worse, he called a meeting with the village officials, accusing me of squatting in our family home. The accusation was absurd. I've lived in our family home since birth 28 years, while my uncle spent only 20 years there before living in another village and eventually moving abroad for 50 years. What followed was nothing short of vindictive. My uncle resorted to petty punishments, cutting off electricity while I was resting, turning off the internet during an online interview, and throwing away food I had purchased. It got so bad that I survived on water and a slice of bread every other day for a week. My best friend eventually discovered what was happening and sent me money so I could eat. At that point, I had enough. When my uncle returned abroad, I blocked him and told my cousin everything. My uncle later messaged my aunt, accusing me of ruining his relationship with his son, but I only spoke the truth. Even my former crew could vouch for the mistreatment I endured. Now, my uncle and I are no longer on speaking terms. My aunt, to her credit, didn't blame me. She was frustrated with her brother's poor decisions as well. Just last month, my aunt had to send him money because he got scammed again. I'm not looking forward to his next visit in 2 years. Story 6. My 25-year-old self and my 61-year-old dad used to have a better relationship. He used to be more considerate of other people and actually cared about how his actions affected those around him. For context, I am slightly autistic, though I'm not sure if that's relevant here. 4 years ago, we lost my mom to lung cancer, and it was devastating for all of us. But instead of stepping up and being there for me and my twin brother, my dad spiraled. He started drinking heavily, as much as he could, without completely running out of money. He was drunk as often as he could be, constantly talking about how he hated his job and how mom should still be with us. Every day, I would come home from work and find myself having to take care of him. I was so consumed with his needs that I didn't even get the chance to grieve my mom properly. A few months after she passed away, My dad confessed that he had used up my mom's entire inheritance, around $70,000. He spent it on dental implants for himself, lent some money to my brother for a car, and the rest went to those scam dating websites. By the time he told us, I was so exhausted and burned out that I couldn't even summon the energy to be angry. When he started smoking again, it hit a nerve. Smoking was what took Mom from us, and seeing him pick it back up made me furious. I decided to set up an online dating profile for him, hoping it would keep him away from the scam sites. He met a woman there, but their relationship turned into some kind of ambiguous friendship after he got so drunk that he fell and hit his head. That incident landed him in the hospital, and he had to take time off work. However, because he had already used up so much leave for his drinking, he wasn't getting paid. The responsibility for keeping the household afloat fell entirely on me. Afterward, he started blaming his forgetfulness and confusion on the head injury. The only reason he even attempted to clean up his act was because his sort of girlfriend threatened to stop speaking to him. One night, he nearly fell through the banister, and I ended up screaming at him while he sobbed about missing Mom. I decided to move in with my grandmother for a few weeks, hoping that my absence might force him to quit drinking. It only partially worked. He hasn't stopped drinking altogether, but he no longer drinks to the point of getting drunk. He also switched from smoking cigarettes to vaping as a way to cut down. The house, however, is still a mess. I try to clean up when I can, but no matter how much effort I put in, I come home to the same chaos. The kitchen is always full of unwashed pans and dishes, and the dining table is covered with items he doesn't bother putting away. He works night shifts 3 days a week and spends the rest of his time either with his not-quite girlfriend or sleeping, letting the mess pile up. When it gets unbearable, he stomps around angrily, accusing me of not helping enough with the cleaning, even though it's his mess. After he calms down, he apologizes, but it doesn't change anything. We have a dog, but my dad doesn't take care of him properly. He doesn't pick up after the dog in the garden, doesn't walk him, and just lets him run around the house. Then he complains about the dog's behavior, like jumping up on the table during meals or grabbing clothes and running off with them. The dog is only partially trained and won't let go of things unless bribed with treats. My dad spends most of his free time sitting at the computer, drinking, and playing video games. Empty cans and bottles pile up around him, and the bottle caps are scattered everywhere. The dog often picks them up, and only then will my dad bother to throw them away. His bedroom is another disaster. Mountains of unwashed clothes fill the room, and he only does laundry when I push him to. When he feels down, he blames Mom, saying it's her fault for leaving us too soon. He frequently talks about how the only reason he's still alive is because of us, and that if we weren't here, he wouldn't be either. He goes on about how he'll finally be happy when he's back with Mom, even though he knows we hate hearing him talk like that. He acknowledges his relationship with his sort of girlfriend isn't the same, but he still spends money he doesn't have taking her out and buying her groceries. Every time he pays me back a small portion of the £500 he owes me, he somehow ends up needing it back shortly after. When I try to confront him about these financial issues or anything else serious, he brushes it off. He either makes jokes, talks to the dog instead, or pulls faces to distract me. If I get upset, he accuses me of being too sensitive, claiming he's just playing around. But when he wants to have a serious conversation, he demands my full attention and gets angry if I don't give it to him. The situation with the dog is also frustrating. During meals, the dog often tries to eat food off my dad's plate. I have to warn him to keep an eye on the dog, but half the time, he just laughs and nudges the plate slightly away. The other half, he dismisses my concerns, saying things like, "The dog's stomach is strong, he'll be fine." Then, he'll start playing with the dog as if nothing happened. My dad disappears to his not-quite-girlfriend's place for 2 to 3 days every couple of weeks. While he's there, he spends money he doesn't have on groceries and dining out with her. When he's home, his evenings follow a predictable routine. He puts on his gaming headset, blasts music through a Bluetooth speaker loud enough for the neighbors to hear, and plays video games late into the night. Amazingly, None of the neighbors have filed complaints, though they've all mentioned that they can hear the noise. Whenever I bring up these problems, his responses are always dismissive. If I complain about the noise, he'll say something like, "Then move. It's my house," or, "It makes me happy. Don't you want me to be happy?" His disregard for how his actions affect others is exhausting. My head constantly hurts, I'm always tired, and I feel like I'm stuck in a cycle where I put in effort to help him, only for him to make me feel like I'm the problem. The thing is, I love my dad. He's my father, and I want him to be okay. I don't want to lose him, but I'm so drained from carrying the emotional and physical weight of this situation. It feels like no matter how much I do or say, nothing changes. I'm tired, so tired, and I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. Please, someone tell me I'm not losing my mind here. I just don't know what to do anymore.